Yeah.
So this is Gideon. You may have heard of Gideon's Trumpet, which was a film with Fonda as a prisoner, I think. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the story of Gideon, and it's in the book of Judges. And this is how it begins. Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and God gave Israel into the hand of the Midians for 7 years. So what did they do, you may well ask? Well, they worshipped at the statues of the Canaanite gods, and Baal and Astarte, or Asherah, depending. Not quite sure if those two really are different. So, does this match up with how you think God behaves? Are we worshiping at the right altar, or do we expect God to punish us if we're not? And if he does he punish us one at a time or as a whole nation? Which is what he seems to be doing in Gideon. Anyway, that's the way the book of Judges is. They have done something wrong, they've been punished because their country's been overrun by whomever, and then they raise up a leader like Gideon to get them all together, to have the tribes work together and defeat whoever ran in the country. Behind all of this, though, is a God that is going to keep his people in line by punishing them until they get it right, which they don't. Our God, I don't think, is like that. So the Midians, the Midians and the Amalekites overrun Israel, and they devastate crops. They don't even try to harvest them for themselves. They just ruin the land. And so Israel gets a crop ready and tries to secretly harvest it before it gets ruined. And often you have to hide from the invaders during that process, which is what we find Gideon doing. Gideon and several others had hidden in the caves to protect themselves and their families. Harvesting the grain was only the first step. In order to separate the grain from the stalk and the chaff, the Israelites needed to beat the grain and then toss it in the air. And then the wind would carry away the waste so that only the heavier, valuable grain would fall to the ground. And people still do this, and that's why we have pictures of it. It's called threshing. And normally one would do this at a threshing floor, which usually was at the top of a hill where the breezes could be helpful in blowing away the shaft and the stalks. This particular threshing floor is the threshing floor for this city, which is Bethlehem. This is a wine press, and it would have been at the bottom of the valley surrounded by vineyards, and in the dark it was an excellent place to hide. Trying to hide himself and his harvest, the hero named Gideon beat his harvest grain in a wine press. Gideon did not begin as a hero. Sneaking around in the dark, he probably thought of himself as a coward. He beat his grain while listening for the enemy, and would sneak back home into the cave with the grain which his family could make into bread. And one night, an angel appeared to him, saying, "The Lord is with you, you mighty warrior." Gideon probably did not feel mighty. He felt scared. And to hide this fear, he cried out to the angel, "Why has God abandoned the people whom God once blessed?" And the angel responded, "That's exactly why I'm here. You, with God's help, will deliver the people of God from the Midianites and the Amalekites." By the way, the Amalekites are like this eternal enemy Whenever there's something they can do wrong for Israel, they will. And they were the ones who showed up the first when Joshua, at the end of the line of Moses, began fighting to save the people from being robbed by this particular tribe. They're just annoying, I guess. You say so, Gideon argued, but I'm from the smallest clan of Manasseh. I need a sign. Stay here and let me bring you an offering, the material with which to make the sign. And so Gideon brought goat meat and leavened bread and broth, and the angel instructed him to put it on a rock and pour the broth over it, which would make it more or less fireproof. And then the angel touched it with a staff, and the whole thing exploded into flame. Now, wouldn't you think that would be enough? I mean, if you saw that happen, wouldn't you be sort of believe that maybe the angel was telling the truth? Now, Gideon was really frightened once this happened. He said, I've seen the face of God and I'm going to die. And God answered Gideon, said, peace be with you. Do not fear. You shall not die. And so Gideon named the spot, the Lord is peace. And then the Lord instructed him to break the statue of Baal at where his father worshipped, and chop down the pole to Astarte, and build an altar on that same spot for God. And there make a sacrifice of one of his father's 2 bulls. So with the help of 10 friends, he did this at night. By the way, he used the wood from the Astarte god to burn the meat for God. Anyway, he did this at night, I think, because he was afraid of his neighbors who were worshiping Baal quite fervently. In the morning, when the people of the clan heard that Gideon had done this in the night, they complained to his father. Shouldn't have done that. Oh dear, got the pictures of you guys mixed up here. Hold on just a minute. There you go. They demanded that his father turn his son over to them so they could kill him. This, they thought, would keep Baal from punishing them. And I can't read part of the slide, so it may not be the same words. Gideon said, the father said, let Baal defend his honor. If Baal is so displeased with Gideon, let Baal kill him. And the people walked away. Nothing happened to Gideon, except that he got a new nickname, Jerubbaal, which means contends with Baal. Then the Spirit of the Lord took possession of Gideon. He thought of nothing but defeating the Midianites. However, to be sure that God had really authorized him to do this, he asked God to give him a sign. And this is where things get a little sketchy. He's already been, approached by an angel. I should think that would have been enough. So he decided to use a fleece, and he tested God by asking God, he was going to leave the fleece out on the threshing floor, and then everything would be covered with dew except the fleece would be dry, or the other way around. So if you will rescue Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I'm putting a wool fleece on the threshing floor. So he's going to try to have everything either become wet or dry. Let's see which one it was. So in the morning, everything was dry, but the fleece was wet with dew. So the next night, he asks, by putting the fleece on this threshing floor, that this time everything around it be wet and the fleece be dry. It seems to me that one of those would have done. It seems to me, anyway, it's a little odd. I mean, would you test God that way? In the morning, everything was very wet except the fleece, which was dry. So, does it seem to you that Gideon is demanding too much of God? What does this say about Gideon, and what does this say about God?
Don't we do the same thing? Don't we ask God for signs all the time?
Yes.
I guess we do. I guess we do. Anyway, he's gotten 3 in a row. He's gotten the angel, now the dry fleece, now the wet fleece. I think he should know at this point. And I think, what about does it say about God?
God is patient.
Pardon?
God is patient.
Yes, Lord is patient, slow to anger. Whoa.
But it doesn't say anything about him not rolling his eyes.
Sure. Or having the entire host of angels roll theirs. But God then ordered Gideon to call all the people hiding in the caves to gather. 22,000 came. And he did this with the trumpet, which is where you get the Gideon's trumpet. He sent out people to sort of gather and say, look, we're gonna rise up. We can get rid of the Midianites. God is with us. So they came out. Then God spoke to Gideon and said that if so many had gathered to fight the Midianites, it would look like as though the people had won the battle and not God. So he told Gideon to dismiss anyone who had the slightest worry about fighting. So Gideon probably stood there and said, you know, if some of you are worried because you're a father and you don't want to lose your life, you need to be at home, go ahead and go. And it's perfectly all right. And so he was left with 10,000. Gideon looked at all those Midianites camped and he worried that he did not have enough soldiers to defeat them. However, he did not argue with God, which is very smart.
Right.
Pardon?
I said that's right.
And then God looked at the 10,000 men and said there were too many for Gideon to use in this battle with the Midianites. So he told Gideon to march his troops to the water, and there God would sort who would stay and who would go and who would stay. So what does this say about God? What does this say about Gideon and his people? And are we like that? I think it's kind of interesting that God wants the credit, you know. I think that's very interesting. Wants to be clearly seen as the one who's in charge here. And I suppose the circumstances, you know, having people worship Baal and trying to reclaim your people, it's important. I don't know. And you say we do this, what, in sort of challenging God to give you a parking space or what?
Many things.
Have the fish bite?
Yeah.
Pardon?
God certainly has not been listening to me as I'm telling him to make this virus go away.
Oh, well, yeah,
Asking him.
yes. On the other hand, what are there, 7 or 8 vaccines that are all seeming to come through? So, what do you want? As the men knelt to drink, God said to take only the men who drink the water by putting their face into it. Do not take those who drink with their hands. So, Gideon has no idea what's going on here. But there is maybe a reason those who could put their face into the water to drink would not have been as worried as those who drank by hand. And this picture does a good job showing the shiftiness of the eyes of those that are drinking by hand. And the reason would be that you could monitor your environment. There were Midianites everywhere, and they could, attack at any moment. And so if you were worried about that, you would probably not drink by just sticking your head in the water. And that would be, so God may have wanted only the men who were not afraid, or perhaps just stupid. I don't know. That's what I think. Anybody have any other explanation as to why the people that use their hands to drink would be dismissed? Any ideas? Okay. So, only 300 were left. So Gideon collected all the trumpets and jars from the 9,700 men who scooped the water up, and then he sent them home. And Gideon then had 300 soldiers left. But each one has a trumpet and a jar. God then said, get up and attack the camp. However, if you're afraid of that, take your friend Purah and go into the camp, the Midianite camp, and see what it is that the Midianites are saying. And therefore Gideon and Purah snuck past the sentries guarding the enemy camp. And hiding among the shadows of the camp, Gideon and Purah listened to the soldiers talk. One of the soldiers said that he'd had a dream about a giant barley cake that tumbled into the camp and smashed his tent. His friend said that the barley cake represented Gideon and that God was going to let the Israelite army smash them in the morning. When Gideon heard this, he realized that God was giving the Midianite soldiers doubts that drained away their ability to believe they could win. Gideon now knew his 300 men could and would conquer thousands of Midianites. So Gideon went back to the camp and he called his men together. He gave each one a torch to hide in a jar, and he gave everyone a trumpet. And then he said, you're going to do what I say to do with these. And Gideon and the Lord waited until dark. And they snuck around and crawled quietly, and they went into 3 groups and surrounded the camp on all sides. And then he said, don't do anything with the horn until I do it, and then crash your pot and light your torch. So Gideon stood up and he blew his trumpet, and everyone blew their trumpets around. And Gideon smashed his jar and held his torch high, and the light shone brightly. Kids would love this picture. I don't know how you're enjoying it, but they thought that was pretty good. And all of the men in the army smashed their jars, and their torches were lit. And the army held their torches up, and the Lord's army blew their trumpets. And the Lord's army shouted, a sword for the Lord, a sword for Gideon. And the men in the Midian camp panicked. Why? Well, in their experience, 1 torch and 1 trumpet was given to every 100 men. And the 300 trumpets and torches fooled the enemy soldiers into thinking that the Israelites had 300,000 men. Breaking of the jars sounded just like the clash of armor, like swords against shields and shields against breastplates. And thus the Midians thought that the Israelites were already in their camp, and it was very dark. And thus the Midianites fought one another, thinking they were fighting their enemies. And because everywhere they turned, they found someone fighting, and they found a new enemy, and they concluded that they had lost the battle already. And so they ran away. And that is how, without a single Israelite soldier getting hurt or even fighting, God won Gideon's war against the Midians. So there's a song that goes with this. Are you ready? It's sung to Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And I would love it if you would all sing with me. You ready to do this? Nobody? Are you ready? Okay. Gideon, a voice called in the night. Get off that something at threshing floor. Go and start a fight. Come to the fight, called Gideon that day. Too many people volunteered away. Leave your sword and take the top and the torch with you. They lit the torch
and crash the pot.
Start the war anew.
in the fright. Great disorder, soon overwhelmed by fear itself,
They ran
across the border. And there it is. Isn't that a cool
Okay.
story?
Yeah.
This is the story.
Sure beats what we did last week.
Oh, I liked last week.
Well, okay. All right. But it's a little touchy.
Thank you, Mary.
So you're welcome. So
I like the message that we always try to do things our way, and when we do things God's way, gee, how much better it is.
yeah, that's true. It's true. And we're pretty sure when we're doing things our way that that it's better. I don't know. It's true.
I have a question.
Sure.
Carla. So this is how God worked in this instance. I've been reading about the early Middle Ages and all the wars, the Goths, Visigoths, Vandals, all those barbarians in Rome. There was just war and slaughter and beheading. So how do we apply God's act in this case of Gideon with history? That's not fair, probably, to ask.
Well, you know, to what degree was God actually in charge and given to slaughter, or has ever been? You know, there wasn't any clear hero in any of the Middle Ages. They were all, it seemed to me, seeking their own glory, no matter what they said God was doing in that time. At least Gideon is not seeking his own glory. And it's clear that whoever is going to be glorious, it's going to be God, if anybody. What's kind of nice about this story is that, you know, whatever damage is done, the enemy did to itself. And ended when they decided to leave. So they were kind of in control of their own destiny, which is very rare, but kind of nice.
Yes. It was nice.
But what happened in the Middle Ages had a church that was militaristic and saw all those that didn't believe the way they prescribed them to believe as unworthy of life. So you could kill it.
Well, it seems like the church in the Middle Ages was the governing body. It was everything in Middle Ages, and so it was logical, I guess, that they had lots of holy wars, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, like the Crusades, a
Yeah.
true holy war, and they would, claim things were holy wars, especially when they were attacking something that they had declared heretic. But on the other side were kings who thought that they should have sovereignty over their own land, and the church was infringing on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think God was on either side.
So in this case,
Yeah.
Gideon's story does not really apply to these holy wars, so-called holy wars, and the slaughter and the pillage and the plunder, even though they said they were in the name of God. Because in this,
You could debate. And I think we did last week, debated that, even what was claimed to be God triumphing probably wasn't. Even in the Bible. Here we've got Gideon, and he's not trying to be triumphal in this point. However, there are several more chapters with Gideon in, and you could argue that he had sort of lost his way and sort of became like Joshua in defending his nation. But and last week we talked about places in Deuteronomy where you're thoroughly authorized to go and kill those who don't believe as you do. But I don't think that God really approved of all of that. I don't think that's how God really worked. I think we're just now, maybe in our age, getting a glimmer of how merciful God truly is and what God would really have us do, which may include pacifism, not even lifting your hand to defend yourself.
well, it's a big question.
Yes, it is.
So, if Jesus was sent to show us how to live a faithful life, which I tend to believe, then, we know how God wants us to live based on how Jesus lived, but the devil or evil or whatever you want to call that really does have a tight grip on us. And, through the years, we've got the wars and, people who think that their way is God's way.
Yeah, yes. I think it's apparently a fairly easy thing to do, to, assume that you're right and that you're on God's side.
Even people who don't believe in God seem to think that God is on their side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it has to do with our hubris, our general arrogance, our tendency to be self-centered, and that the best of us somehow manage to never make a move, perhaps, without rechecking and checking again, and remembering that we are less than than anyone else. We are of no more value than absolutely anyone else. And therefore, we have no right.
We were speaking to this morning, Stephen and I were having a conversation about a very close friend of Stephen's who passed away within the last year or so. And she lived on the Indiana University campus. Steve knew her when he was a student there around 1980. And she continued to live on the campus to take classes the entirety of her life, so that she would have enough work study, and enough class load to do work study, to work in the opera department. And her entire life, she had not two nickels to rub together. She had, by the world's standards, she had absolutely no success whatsoever. But Steve knew a lady who was very happy, very content, unbelievably well-read, unbelievably educated, and she treasured humor, she treasured reading, she treasured giving her gifts to the opera department. She treasured everything that she did in her life. She was happy, she was content, but she didn't have a penny to her name. And so we talked about what does God say life is, and what is the world's standard for success, and what is God's standard for success, you know?
Yes, and I think we've all met people like that. At St. Anne's, we could look to the sisters who never had any money, and whatever they received as gifts, they immediately gave away, and lived, I think, probably excellent lives, truly excellent, and they had nothing to do with anything that would be considered successful by any, corporate world standard or military world standard, or, nothing. And yet, what a gift.
So I rather imagine that's what Jesus was talking about when he talked about looking at the flowers of the field and how they toil not, neither do they want.
Yes, yes.
Well, as Deb just said, are the world standards God's standards, or are the world standards deception?
Did you say deception?
Yeah, deception.
No. That was very biblical, at least very New Testamentally biblical.
We deceive ourselves and God is not within us.
Uh-huh.
So when the barbarians are at the borders and coming in, and you're Roman, you just sort of see what happens when they come in.
I know.
And
Difficult.
I think that's why we never perfect this faith thing.
Yes, that's well said.
Yes.
Can we bring the book of Joshua back into this?
Well, I've read it recently. Ugh. Ugh.
I'm sorry, our computer messed up. You read what recently?
Oh, the book of Joshua. Say it again, Mark.
Well, was it 2 weeks ago we covered the book of Joshua?
Just
It
last
was
week.
last week.
Oh, it was last week, yeah. So that was the genocide
Mm-hmm.
and the whole conflict we have about the modern view of God versus the Old Testament biblical view of God. And that probably goes back to Carla's question about the Crusades, how mankind was just warring with themselves, and then Joshua, God condoned that and supported it.
Yeah. Yeah, or it seems to. But I think it has to do with the business of how we think about God. And so even Gideon has some issues, I think, with how that would be different or from how we think about God. But it's better.
I was struck by how much our times define us, because when they were all at the river and the people who put their face in were the ones that were saved, I was like, this is so not what you're supposed to do in COVID time, because that would be sharing your germs with everybody else who was drinking. You don't put your face in the water.
Yeah, there was no germ theory, according to my latest National Geographic, until 1857. So
Oh.
anyway, but yeah, not only that, but then I was thinking, well, what about Giardia? Is that how you pronounce it?
Giardia, yeah.
Wait a minute. My dog even caught it, so there you go.
Nasty bug.
Well, I think
I just want to say it just leads one question leads to the other. It's a lot of questions.
mm-hmm.
So I leave it on the table for now.
Just the way we practice medicine, we also practice faith. It means we never get it right. We're always practicing.
Yeah. Thank heavens, I don't think God expects us to get it right. I don't think God does. Maybe after years of watching us, he's given up, or she's given up, but
No.
the good news is that
Eye
we're just expected to try our best. So, well, I think we're done for the day.
Okay.
Let's have a wonderful rest of our Sunday.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Take care.
I'm not
Bye.
sure
Thank you.
what's on the agenda for next week. What's
Starting next week, we're going to be using the meeting room function, the breakout room function of Zoom, and the committee that's looking at transition. This is the transition not to worship, but transition in terms of Gary as priest in charge. So we'll have a different question in each of the meeting rooms, and we'll be having small group discussions in little meeting rooms. So we're going to learn new piece of technology and gather some information from the members of the parish. So if you talk to other people from Good Shepherd who maybe are given to hearing that thanks be to God, hallelujah, hallelujah, and hit the leave button, ask them to please not hit the leave button, but rather come to Faith Forum, because that's a way to have input in where we're going as a church.
okay? Sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good week.
You too.
Bye now.
Thank you, Mary.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Mary.
See everyone later.
Bye.